Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum everyone. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Allahumma salli wa sallim wa barik wa anim ala Sayyidina wa Habibina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammadin al-Fatih lima ughliqa wal khatim lima sabaq. ناصر الحق بالحق والهادي إلى صراطك المستقيم وعلى آله حق قدره ومقداره العظيم. اللهم إني أعوذ بك أن أضل أو أضل أو أزل أو أزل أو أظلم أو أظلم أو أجهل أو يجهل علي. Alhamdulillah. There's different ways to tackle this subject. I think I'll do it by doing it in kind of segments or acts, if you will, in an attempt to drive the point home. The first one is a story. I'm just going to move around because this is the first time I get to move around on the stage. The first one is a story. Thumam ibn Athal. This is a companion of the beloved sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. And Thumama, in about the year 9th of Dhul Hijrah, 9 after Hijrah, he came from Yamama, and the beloved sallallahu sent a group of people to intercept a caravan going to Mecca that was sending some wheat. And one of the people that was captured was Thumama, and he was not Muslim at the time. Thumama was brought, and he was tied to one of the pillars at the masjid. And the beloved sallallahu alayhi wa sallam goes up to him and says, "Ma indaka ya Thumama? What do you think I'm going to do with you, Thumama?" And Thumama looks at the beloved sallallahu alayhi wa sallam and he says, "If you kill me, you kill someone, taqtulu dha dam. You'll kill someone who his people will come after you for the blood. If you let me go, you're generous." In other words, he's saying, like, you could do whatever you want. I'm not going to change anything here. Day 2, the beloved ﷺ comes to him. And during this time, he ﷺ instructs the companions, make sure you feed him well, you give him water. He just remains imprisoned. Day 2, the beloved ﷺ comes to him and he says, "Ma indaka ya Thumama? What do you got, Thumama?" And Thumama says, "Do what you want," basically. Like, if you kill me, you kill someone who's got blood. If you don't, if you let me go, you're a generous person. And the third day, the beloved ﷺ comes to Thumama and he says, "Ma indaka ya Thumama?" On day 3. Now I want you to just kind of picture this. Thumama is tied up at a pillar in the masjid, watching the companions, watching the beloved ﷺ, watching people come and go, observing the prayer. And on the third day, Thumama says, "Whatever I told you on day 1 and 2 is not changing, it's the same thing." And so he sallallahu alayhi wa sallam says, "Let him go." So Thumama gets up, leaves, goes to a well just outside of Medina, takes a bath, comes back, and he says, "Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah." He goes to Mecca, and they say to him, "Did you leave your religion?" He says, "I didn't leave the religion. I was worshipping idols, in other words. That's not a religion. I embraced Islam. And you're not getting a drop of wheat unless Muhammad allows it." And then he steps off. That's the first act. Lesson from it is Thumama got to sit and observe and experience. He was watching people do things. He was watching the prayer. He was watching the interaction. 2, one of the most profound experiences I've ever had was in 2010 in Spain. We were at Al-Creed de Rosales. This was Rihla with Sheikh Hamza Yusuf. And at night, Sheikh Hamza told Sidi Abd al-Samad, the owner of the land, turn off all the lights. And he took us out, and Sheikh Hamza brought out this laser pen. And he did like the most incredible star orientation I've ever experienced. He was showing us how to tell the Qibla through the stars. He was showing us how to tell time at night through just knowing where the star location is in the sky. And he was explaining the difference for those of us who were coming from North America, because at the time I was still coming from Vancouver. And he was telling the Australians, when you're down under, this is what it's going to look like. That experience reminded me of something I used to do when I was a child, like 7, 8 years old in Sudan. The routine at night was the entire family, if it's not raining, you would go inside the rooms and you would grab your bed and you'd bring the bed outside and you would lie down and you'd look up at the sky. And the thing we did was we'd count the stars. Now, because there's no light pollution, there was billions and billions of stars. Today, you'd be lucky if you could tell the Great Dipper. So you sit there and count the stars. Nowadays, you have to imagine in your mind some sheep jumping across fences. But we actually would count the stars to sleep. It looked chaotic. It looked like there was no rhyme or reason to it. But when you understand the stars, you understand the law and order of how the stars are. 3, social media. There was a time I was just having a chat over breakfast this morning with my friend, and we were just talking about our experience growing up. We're ancient. We remember when your mother would yell at you because she needs to use the phone, so you'd have to get off the internet because it was dial-up. I remember when my dad first got a car that had a phone in it, and that was like, whoa, you guys really made it. You have a phone in your car, and it was like all these wires inside the car and a big giant thing outside the car just to have a phone. The cell phones that we had when they first came out was these big giant things. Growing up, the biggest problem my mom had with me was, what are you doing outside all this time? Why are you home at 2 a.m.? Literally, we were at Tim Hortons with my friends, just chatting. There's a cafe in Canada, for those of you who are not familiar. We would be worried about not going out because we would be worried about missing things. The fear of missing out, FOMO, for us was being outside. I don't want to miss anything happening outside. But today, you don't want to go outside. You want to be on your phone because of FOMO on virtual media. You guys today are very disembodied. You live in your heads. And you live on your phones, and you don't even experience life as it should be experienced. You haven't seen the stars as they should be seen. The ongoing debates, and I don't mean to get into this too much, about the moon sighting, it's actually very interesting. People who do the calculations, despite the fact that there's no traditional evidence for it. You know how the Prophet ﷺ said to do the moon sighting? Let me show you. Because when you study hadith, a lot of you think hadith is, I pull it up on my phone, on my app, Mawsu'at al-Hadith, I pull it up and here it is, and here's the English and all that. He sallallahu alayhi wa sallam did this. الشهر هكذا وهكذا. So when you study hadith, the scholars, when they teach you, they will actually do the gestures associated with the hadith. Now explain to me, why would a merchant, because that's one of the things that he ﷺ did, who knows math, knows how to calculate, knows how to say the number 29 and 30, why would he physically show it to you like that? How many of you have actually seen the moon and recognized, depending on how the crescent looks, whether it's waxing or waning? How many can tell if it's waxing or waning just by looking at it? So the creation of Allah, in all of His glory and manifestation, we don't experience it. We don't see it. We don't enjoy it. We don't appreciate it. We don't even understand it. And then you want to tell me, are logical proofs enough? If you're living in your head all this time, when we go to the chapel, and I don't say this to disparage or to knock, but when we go to the chapel at the hospital, and it's dhuhr time or asr time, I find it very interesting that it's the Muslims who are doing things, bowing, prostrating, bring the mat, do the whole thing. We've done wudu beforehand. But the Christians come in and sometimes they just stand at the door and just kind of close their eyes. Or they'll sit and just close their eyes, and then they get up and leave. The Hindus, same thing. They'll just sit there and close their eyes. It's just this there's no embodied experience of actually going through the motions. When you look at Islam, on the other hand, this very organic reminder on a daily basis that you don't own time. Because Subh and Dhuhr and Asr and Maghrib and Isha, they come at a time that oftentimes for many might be inconvenient, but it doesn't matter. You do not own time. The beginning and the end of the month, riddle me this. 200 years ago, before there were 24-hour streaming services from Mecca. How did people do Eid al-Adha? Because a lot of people think today, it's like, but they're doing Hajj right now. 200 years ago, they didn't know that. So what were they doing? It was moon sighting. They were just looking. Did the Muslims not know how to do mathematics? If you read the literature on that, we invented the thing. Algebra was us. Why did Al-Khwarizmi invent algebra? He was really, literally commissioned by the Khalifa at the time. He said, hey, we have a lot of complex inheritance rules, and we have a lot of complex transactions in the market, and we need a discipline that can objectively establish right from wrong. So can you please establish, read the introduction to Al-Jabr by Al-Khwarizmi, and the entire thing is basically an ode to Islam. It's like, I'm doing this to serve the religion. But what are we doing today? We live in a secularized, materialized world that advances the interests of economics and the illusion of the control over time over everything else. We value our creations more than we value the creation. So you prefer to be on social media with this tailored algorithms, and those of you who haven't watched this, I highly recommend you watch The Social Experiment. Because even those who created the stuff, they say, we're not immune to it. We're also subject to the manipulations of it. So when you say I have doubts about Islam, the first thing I ask people is, like, let's just get back to the basics, first of all. I'm not even going to ask you about, did you study Aqidah or any of that stuff. I'm going to ask you about, how's your prayer? Are you praying? One of the questions that was brought up yesterday to me was, sometimes it just feels like a grind. You know, we're doing all the service and it just feels like a grind. I'm like, are you doing it because you're chasing a feeling? Or are you doing it because Allah is expecting you to? Sometimes the test in the religion is that you don't get a feeling because you're not worshiping Allah for a psychedelic experience. You're worshiping Allah because Allah told you to, and you're showing gratitude because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is using you as a means to remember Him. This entire thing is a reminder. فطرة الله التي فطر الناس عليها لا تبديل لخلق الله. This is how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created you, to know Him. The Quran is not an argument in that way. It's a reminder. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala calls it a dhikr. It's a reminder to people. What is the reminder of? It's a covenant that we all took at the very beginning. أَلَسْتُ بِرَبِّكُمْ? Am I not your Lord? بَلَا شَهِدْنَا. Yeah, we testify. We bear witness. Alhamdulillah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has granted me the opportunity to study and do a bunch of things and earn some accolades. But what's amazing about all of it is the recognition that it's all, at the end of the day, in itself is meaningless. I don't get caught up to it. I don't get caught too much up with it. Even when I introduce myself, I don't like the introductions. You know, I went a couple months back, and how I introduced myself, hi, my name is Mohamed. How are you doing? And my dad, you know, is just a proud father. Tell him you did this and you did that and you did this, and like I was like, I don't know, I don't like getting into this stuff because I actually feel it's a very strange experience when you think about it. When you're on this side of it, like the imposter syndrome really kicks in. But as a Muslim, I don't really have an imposter syndrome in that way because I just recognize, like, it's not my own doing. It's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala just kind of granting you these things, and you're just employing them in whatever capacity you can for hopefully the good. And if it's bad, then to be prevented from it. There are a lot of people today that ask questions about religion that don't have the basics. I'll finish off with an analogy because the specialty that I'm training in is called rehabilitation medicine. So anybody who's had a stroke, who's had an accident, a trauma of some sort, after they get stabilized in hospital and they're sorted out from an acute medical point of view, they come to subacute. They come to me, and then our job is basically to work with the physiotherapists and the OTs and all of that to make sure that your medical status does not deteriorate, and if there are any medical issues, for us to basically help you with it so that you can continue the recovery process. Now, the interesting thing about somebody with a stroke, for example, and they come in a variety of different manifestations, but the typical kind of image that comes to somebody's mind with a stroke is half paralyzed. Those patients, when they're getting trained by the physios and the OTs, the goal is not to recover the function of whatever they lost, because once that area of the brain is gone, typically it's gone. You don't get it back. So the goal is to learn new strategies to get around the deficits, and to minimize mistakes. Because an error in the way that you step could be catastrophic. So you'll have somebody with a stroke that will drag their feet, or they'll do kind of like a swing out phase like that. And so you teach them how to walk properly and balance themselves. From a spiritual point of view, or just to back up a second, I can recreate a stroke for you artificially by transmagnetic stimulation, TMS. So I put on these electrodes, and then I fire some electromagnetic force, and I can actually paralyze one side of your body and give you the illusion, the feeling that you can't move. It goes away when I take that away. From a spiritual and an intellectual perspective, just about everybody that has gone through public education and university education has been given a stroke, an intellectual stroke. You are given the illusion that you're critically thinking about things. You think that you're able to evaluate claims, but when you don't understand the nature of language, how is language constructed? When you don't know how to structure a syllogism, a logical argument properly, when you don't understand how emotions are used and terms are used in particular ways in rhetoric to elicit an emotional state so that you can go along with it, then are you really critically thinking about anything? Today, in this postmodern era, we have a situation in which the word author doesn't mean anything. Words are meaningless. Anything means everything. And a word can be whatever you want it to mean. And anything anybody says, they're no longer given the benefit of the doubt or asked for elaboration or explanation for what they intended by it. You are now, as the subjective recipient of whatever it is that you see, are the author. I will say what you meant. I will attribute intentions to everything that you had. And regardless of your attempts, no matter how indefatigable they are to try to explain yourself, I can condemn or absolve you. So the root of all of this has to go back down to not even YouTube debates, because YouTube debates, they're like the WWE of, intellectual whatever. That's not how it's like watching a UFC fight. It's great, and one subjected the other to, submission or whatever. What you need education yourself. You need to actually understand how language works. You need to understand how logic works. There was a question that came up, because aside from, one of the things that I teach at Al-Andalus Academy is Aqidah, and one of the questions that came up was to do with, well, if something is possible or rationally possible regarding the prophets, then doesn't that mean that why do I have to believe it? And then we had to go back into a breakdown of just basics about what is badihi and what is nadari, what is reflexively true and what requires a contemplation for it to be true. You'd be surprised by how some of the most perplexing questions you have can be answered by just a simple study of aqidah, logic, rhetoric, how rhetoric is used to drive you emotionally, to get you to respond. Understanding the media that you're consuming, social media, with all the issues that it have. For me, the biggest problem with it is this algorithm that creates an illusion of objectivity or some reality for you that may not actually speak to the reality of the world. The problem with it, as Dr. Umar Farooq Abdullah constantly reminds us, ideas have consequences. So if I can implant an idea in your mind through an algorithm about something, and then you don't actually engage and interact with groups, as was mentioned in the previous speech, that you need to actually be in halaqas, and you need to be in gatherings, and you need to have back and forth with people and engage and see facial reactions and body language and engage with at that level and be reminded. And more importantly, be reminded with people who are not your peers. Traditional education did not have people of the same age at the same time together in one space. It was always different groups and different levels, so that you're always reminded that there is still a way to go, and then you're reminded of the ones that you need to tutelage and guide along the way. So it's not something that I can solve in one speech, that, hey, just here's the recipe, 1, 2, 3, do that, here's your prescription. If a patient comes to me and they have a headache that's been going on for 6 months and they don't know how to resolve it, and now they're starting to have visual changes, I'm not just going to give you a Panadol. I actually have to do a bit of a workup to find out if there's something growing in there that I need to deal with. And for us, we have a TMS, a transmagnetic stimulation experiment happening at the intellectual and the spiritual level that is basically as if you go into a ring, because this world right now for me is like an octagon. You're going into an octagon, but you're tied with one arm behind your back, and you're asked, now battle. Now go in and do this. And you don't even know that your arm is tied up. That's the tricky thing about it. You have no insight, which is how we determine capacity for patients. Does this patient have capacity based on what they understand about their limitations, that there is actually a problem here? Many of us don't. And a final message to the young crowd here. Your social media influencers and Muslims in media are not your guides. When you have comedians, Muslims marrying Hindus and boasting about it, that this is love and is great. When you have sisters who are questioning the validity or the lack thereof of some Islamic practice, and asking you to just, come in and share your thoughts and send me your questions and your Insta stories and your feelings about all of this stuff. It's an age of feelings now. It's how you feel about something. I'll close off with a final story. Very close person to us asked us, do I have to follow a madhab, or can I just pick and choose how they're all scholars, they're all Muslims. I said, oh, you can pick and choose. There's just a couple of requirements. It's very easy to do. Just memorize the Quran and the 10 various recitations and understand them very thoroughly. Do the pre-Islamic poetry as well and understand what all the Arabic language that's involved in it entails. You'll need to get through not just the 6 canonical hadith collections, but probably the 10. So do that for sure. Study tafsir as well. And then maybe we can talk about picking and choosing. Oh, forgot. Also, the usul. You need to understand the usul of the 4 different madhabs just to get to start, and then understand how the other madhab that are extinct now, they're no longer in existence, understand how they derive the rulings. And based on all of that, make sure that all of your practice is on point. You're praying your 5 daily prayers. Hopefully you're doing some tahajjud at night. You're doing your fasting. You're doing all these things. If you do all of that, then you can pick and choose, because you'll be doing it based on knowledge. As of right now, however, Miss 21-year-old, could you please explain to me what basis are you using to pick and choose, other than it feels like this should be the right thing? And how is that feeling? Where is it coming from? It's coming because you've been conditioned by the modern world of what feels right and what feels wrong. This religion is not based on feelings. This religion is based on fitrah. These are 2 different things. And you need to get your act right first before you talk about, istifti qalbaka, seek a fatwa from your heart. That was given to a sahabi who was doing tahajjud at night. And you're struggling with waking up for subah. Anyways, I don't mean to be condescending. I apologize if that came across that way. I just wanted to make sure that sometimes being direct is important, because I don't want to miss my words and get the wrong idea. I just want you to really walk away just understanding that sometimes you need to know that you need to study and you need to understand, and you have limitations. And one of the things that I came across recently was a fighter who's trying to challenge professional fighters in a ring, and he goes into different areas and he always challenges like the nothings in the gym. But then the coach stepped into the ring and obliterated him in 2 seconds, and he said, if you want to come and do this properly, we can do it properly. Otherwise, I'm not going to give you the illusion that you're ready to go and take on the world and do all of this. Sometimes you have to be told. Well, alhamdulillah rabbil alameen. I'm really, really friendly usually. I just wanted to, Jazakumullah khairan.